expedition, but Murphy's Law dictated that two of the group members had to pull out due to various issues. It was a disappointment to have fewer members to share in the experience, but on the other hand, there were some benefits. Fewer logistical problems, more space, and so on. Personally, I wasn't greatly affected by it. While most of us were close friends, I hadn't known those two very well. Our rendezvous point was the cave entrance at the crack of dawn. I was the first one there, as usual. Those who knew me often remarked on my punctuality. Slowly, the rest of the group arrived, parking their cars and unloading the equipment that we had organized together. As the expedition leader, I was carrying the emergency provisions, first aid kit, flare gun, GPS, and locator. It seemed quite odd to take a flare gun into an underground location, but I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. We gathered at the cave entrance. There was Jason, Alex, Karen, Samantha, Vincent, Ashley, and of course myself. Alex and I were experienced spelunkers, while the rest had varying skill levels. Moderate for Karen, Vincent, and Samantha, and poor for Jason, who was a first-timer, and Ashley. Normally, it was against my instincts to take a first-timer into an unexplored cave, especially with such a large group, but he promised to follow every command I gave him and agreed to carry the most cumbersome equipment on the safe parts of the track. The cave loomed in front of us, dark and forbidding. For the 100th time, I wondered why this cave, according to every available record of local geological sites, had been unexplored. Perhaps it was due to its isolated location or the fact that, until recently, there had been no way for vehicles to access it through the surrounding forest. "Are you sure it's all right?" Ashley nervously asked, shifting from foot to foot. His earlier bravado had deserted him. "Yes. You can't change your mind once we're in, so decide now," I said flatly, turning around without waiting for an answer. He'd make his own mind up without any further input from me. The rest of the group followed me in after a few moments of apparent indecision. Soon, the darkness swallowed us whole. Inside, the cave was much larger than it appeared from the outside. It stretched inwards for about 200 meters and then sloped down sharply. As usual, I ordered the group members to buddy up. This system divided the group into pairs and threes, with each pair responsible for staying together. Ashley and I were partners, given that I was the most experienced and he was the least. Spelunking wasn't as fun when you had to care for someone else, but it was a necessary evil. Besides, he was a quick learner. Soon, the sunlight from the cave entrance faded. "Flares out!" I ordered. One by one, the expedition members cracked their flares according to local guidelines. Each member carried 2 packs of 30 handheld flares. It may have seemed excessive, but the flares weren't very strong and only provided enough light for the immediate area around the user. I took a glow stick from my pack and wedged it into the rock beside me. Only I carried these, and they were much stronger than the flares, able to last up to 12 hours with diminishing light after 8. I used them to mark our trail back up. Slowly, we continued down. The handheld flares lasted for an average of 15 minutes, and soon we reached an edge. I ordered the group to stop 5 feet from the precipice, where the ground leveled out. As you may have noticed, I'm a stickler for safety measures, but not without good reason. I didn't want any deaths on my hands. "Ashley, crack a flare and throw it down," I said, watching to see how he did it. Ashley withdrew a flare from his pack, lit it, and then, without moving, tossed it forward down the hole. I nodded in approval. He had moved forward past the 5-meter guideline. I crept forward to the precipice and looked into the abyss. Then I saw it. Descending into the darkness, barely half a meter from the cliff edge, was what appeared to be a staircase. The light of the flare illuminated it, making one thing clear. It wasn't a man-made staircase. At least it didn't look like one. It appeared to be hewn out of the descending rock, meaning the original cliff had extended further into the cave. The stairs were rough and uneven, but close enough for government work, as the saying goes. "What is it?" one of the group members asked from behind me. "Looks like a natural staircase of sorts," I answered distractedly. I withdrew another glow stick from my bag and planted it at the top of the stairs. Let's go. We descended cautiously. The caves are notoriously deceptive, and ahead of me, the darkness grew thicker. It seemed palpable almost, physically. As if my thoughts were true, the flares we held seemed to diminish in the face of the abyss. After about 50 steps, I reached the bottom. That's when I heard it, a crack that sounded like a gunshot, loud and sharp. I spun around at the foot of the stairs. Behind me, Jason was tumbling roughly down the last few steps, heading straight toward me. I quickly spun out of the way, and he crashed to the floor, moaning in agony. The rest of the group hurried toward me, concerned. As I bent down to inspect the injury, it was immediately obvious that his ankle was twisted at an unnatural angle. It was clearly broken. Jason's face had rapidly drained of color. "Karen, Vincent." "Grab him by the arms," I said quietly, unwilling to exacerbate the situation by panicking. They picked him up slowly, his ankle dangling grotesquely beneath him. Something glinted under the crimson light of the flares. I knew it was bone. I reached into my pack, taking out 2 small batons and a white bandage. "This is going to hurt," I warned. The caution was wasted on Jason. He was already half unconscious. I grabbed his ankle and twisted it into place. The bone cracked again, and that roused Jason from his stupor. He screamed, piercingly, loudly enough to hurt my ears. Trying not to prolong his agony, I quickly wrapped the bandage around the batons, which I placed on either side of his leg to brace it. The screaming stopped, but not because the pain had faded. Jason had passed out. Take him up to the entrance of the cave and to the hospital. If he wakes, give him these painkillers, I told his helpers, Karen and Vincent. They nodded and began the arduous climb up to the surface, carrying their unconscious companion. "Shouldn't we go with them?" Ashley began, but I cut him off. "No! We came this far, and we're not going to stop now. I want to investigate this cave to the end. Remember, I told you that you couldn't change your mind," I said sharply, taking out my anger over letting the accident happen under my leadership on him. Ashley, known as Ash to his friends, but I never used that name, fell silent. I felt a fleeting sense of guilt at my attitude, but I quickly brushed it off and spun around. Already Jason and the others were out of view. Around us, the darkness surrounded us like a malevolent entity. The landing we were on led further into the cave, and we proceeded with caution. Thankfully, I had marked our progress with the glow sticks at various intervals. Strangely, like the flares, the glow sticks gave off less light the deeper we progressed. It began to unnerve me, and I could tell the others noticed it too. Alex and Samantha, who were incidentally brother and sister, fell a few steps behind us. Ashley, to my right, was silent. Finally, as the flares grew ever dimmer, I saw something in the wall to my right. I called the diminished group over and cracked a new flare to provide extra light. It appeared to be some sort of carving in the wall. I studied it carefully. The scene depicted a few humanoid figures lying on the ground. Several scratches of red seemed to indicate wounds. Various pillars around them rose to the roof of the cavern, but that wasn't nearly the worst part. In front of the figures, the victims, I now corrected myself, was a large figure. It may have had more detail in the past, but only the outline remained. The body had been scratched out. It was a disturbing scene. Then I looked beneath the scene, and my eyes widened. There was a message. The strange thing about the message was that it was in English. The carving looked entirely authentic, meaning that a caveman, if you'll pardon the pun, had created it. I found it impossible that the same person could have etched the 5 words below the picture. Behind me, Alex read the message aloud. "The jackal in the cave, how strange," he said. Indeed, that was the message, written entirely in capital letters. I dismissed the carving and turned back to the main path. It was obviously a hoax. There was no way a caveman could write in any script, let alone in English. Probably some king fooling around in days long past. But it still made me uneasy, regardless of what I assumed it to be. If it was a hoax, then why did it look so damn authentic? Eventually, the four of us had had our fill of the jackal in the cave, and after Ashley snapped a photo of it for a keepsake, we continued deeper into the cave. I found myself forced to light 2 flares at once, trying to ward off the choking darkness. The diminishing effect of the flares puzzled me. In all my years of spelunking, I had never encountered anything like this. I wondered whether it was a defective batch or if there was some other reason. There had to be a logical, rational explanation. Behind me, Alex and Samantha were still locked in conversation. I picked up snatches of their heated debate as we walked. They, like me, were still pondering the origin of the admittedly ominous cave drawing. I wished they would drop it already, or at least quiet down. I looked to my right and saw nothing but a sloping cave wall. I looked away and back to the trail. I froze and turned. There, among the rocks I had just glanced at, was another carving. I felt a wave of sickness wash over me as I hurried over to it. The red glow of the flares flickered on the wall, dancing over the picture and making it look almost demonic under the sparse light. It depicted a scene much like the last one, except this time there were only 2 bodies on the floor. The third was suspended in midair, seemingly held by an appendage that was not quite an arm, not quite a tentacle. The title, Jackal, appeared above the scene. The pillars around the figures looked similar to those in the previous carving, but now they were marked with small, indistinct etchings. Like before, only the faint outline of the jackal remained. The rest of it had been scratched or smeared out. Beneath the scene was another 5-word message, one that I read quickly and immediately wished I hadn't. Go back. The jackal waits, it said. I turned from the carving just as the others moved in to get a good look, trying not to panic. The air felt thin and dry, much like the air in the Andes. I had gone climbing there a few years ago, and terrible things had happened, which explained my preference for underground rocks as opposed to aerial ones. But that's a story for another time, another place. Around me, the darkness thickened. I could no longer see without the aid of the flares. Suddenly, irrationally, I knew that if I stayed in this underground labyrinth for much longer, I would lose my sanity. But that was the mind of an irrational man talking. I leaned against the opposite wall, breathing deeply and slowly to regulate my rapid heartbeat. Spots danced in front of my eyes momentarily as I oxygenated my blood quickly. Slowly, the panic faded, to be replaced by a sense of calm. I didn't get overworked often, but when I did, I tended to edge toward hysteria. Taking one last deep breath, I straightened up and looked around. That's when I realized that Ashley was gone. Slowly, I stood, scanning the passage for any sign of him. Samantha and Alex were still arguing over the cave carving. They were typically argumentative for identical twins. As Alex drew breath to continue his opinion, I stepped between them, holding my hands up in a gesture of peace. Have either of you seen Ashley? He's gone, I said, stepping back once I saw that they had ceased fighting and were now listening to what I had said. No, they said in unison. I sighed in frustration and looked around the cavern. There was no trace of Ashley anywhere. He couldn't have gone far, not with that massive pack strapped to him, Alex said reasonably, probably sensing the panic I was feeling. The entire expedition had had problems from the start. First the dropouts, then Jason, and now this. It felt like we were cursed, or something like that, some superstitious nonsense. I was a born skeptic and proud of it. He could have only gone forward or back, Samantha said, walking forward to the edge of the light and looking around. We should split up. No, I said, resolute. We're not going to split up under any circumstances. Under any circumstances, I continued. If Ashley went back, he'll eventually get out of the cave by himself. So, we go forward and hope that stupid prick hasn't done anything reckless. I interjected flatly, turning away from the duo and proceeding into the darkness. After a shared glance between Alex and Samantha, one whose meaning was undecipherable, at least to me, they followed and so we continued. As we progressed, I felt the path descend. It was a marginal slope, undetectable to the naked eye, but I could feel myself pushing harder into the rock with each step, thanks to the extra gravity of the descent. It wasn't of any great concern to me. Such natural formations were common. We proceeded even further into the depths of the cave, calling out Ashley's name as we moved. Then I saw it. It was off to the right, like the others, another carving. I felt a wave of sickness as I scanned it. The figure of the jackal had grown in size once again. The tentacle appendage hybrid was now shorter, as if the beast had pulled it back. The previously held corpse was ominously absent from the scene. I tried not to think about what had happened to it. The pillars with carvings on them also appeared as before, but this time the jackal had most of its detail erased, leaving little more than an outline. However, there was more detail on the edge of the beast this time. I knew the short lines represented skin, apparently leathery and cracked. Then I read the message. It was once again 5 words long, and my eyes widened in a flash of shock and fear. "This is your last chance," it read. I stumbled back from the carving, fear rushing through me. I raised my hands in front of me, almost as if it was alive and coming for me. As I hit the back wall, I saw Alex and Samantha move closer to study the carving. They seemed unaffected by the ominous message, unlike myself. I gasped for breath, winded by the sudden impact of the wall against me, trying to clear my mind. The mix of panic and fear clouded my thoughts as I stared at the carving, which I no longer believed to be the work of pranksters. I turned to my left, hoping to see Ashley. Instead, I saw something else, the gateway. It appeared to be a stone arch, made of black granite, following the contour of the cave precisely and creating a strange effect. Carvings of various things, symbols, letters, and pictures, covered the gateway, which appeared seamless, with no joins or cuts. I approached it almost unwillingly, feeling my heart rise into my throat as I stared at the ground immediately behind the gateway and onwards. The walls, floor, and ceiling of the cave beyond the gateway were covered in fine white dust. Alex and Samantha joined me at the edge of the gateway. We were silent, studying it. I looked at the top of the gateway and saw yet another 5-letter message carved there. "The gateway of the jackal," it read. "And hell with it," I thought. Then I heard the scream. It was Ashley. "We have to get to him," Alex yelled, turning to me. With every fiber of my being, I resisted stepping through the gateway. I knew that if we did, terrible things would happen. If I stepped through, I knew I would eventually meet the jackal. But I had to know about Ashley, about the carvings, everything. I had to. So, with a deep breath and trying to steady my hands, I made my choice. Together, we stepped through the gateway, towards Ashley and the dark beast beyond. The first change I noticed was the ground. The fine white dust coated the entire cave right past the gateway. I couldn't identify the origin of the dust. It didn't appear to be from any sort of mineral or rock I'd encountered before. It was strange, but given the nature of the rest of the cave, that made it almost normal. The darkness grew progressively thicker as we advanced. I noticed we were running low on flares. Only about 20 left. It was a problem, but not one I was particularly concerned about, given the current predicament. Ashley hadn't made any noise since his initial scream. That concerned me far more than if he'd kept screaming. There could be a logical reason for him not screaming. Perhaps he had run deeper into the cave. Maybe he was conserving his voice, I thought. But I was throwing up improbable answers to cover my fear. My true thought rose unbidden to my mind. What if whatever made him scream stopped him from doing so again? I felt sick. Ahead of us, not even 100 meters from the gateway, was a crossroads, the first such divide in the otherwise linear path. I had appreciated the lack of divergent paths so far, because it meant we didn't have to divide our already stunted group. It seemed like extraordinary bad luck on our part, appearing now as though nothing in this godforsaken cave had been left to chance. Lost in my grim thoughts, I did not notice the object ahead of us until Alex, suddenly exclaimed and ran toward it. Startled, I looked up, but Alex blocked my direct view of it. All I knew was that it was quite large. I ran toward it, my heart racing. It was Ashley's pack, ripped and torn, blood staining it, and the immediate area in irregular patterns. I felt a chill run down my spine. Beside me, Alex stepped back, tentative and speechless. Something attacked him, tore the pack right from his back with incredible force. It must have injured him too, judging by the blood. I said quietly, my voice surprisingly calm and clinical. It's obvious. Something attacked him. That's it, I'm out, Alex said, turning away quickly, but not before I saw the terror in his eyes. He was terrified. Samantha nodded in agreement, turning to leave as well. I did not try to stop them. They'd be back. You won't get a foot past the gateway. I called to them, certain that the entrance would prevent them from leaving. I turned back to Ashley's pack slowly and began searching through it. I quickly grabbed a few items, and as my hand landed on the flare gun, I hesitated for just a moment, but then I took it and held it in my hand. I knew from experience with various types of wildlife that a flare gun could be an effective weapon. If I met anything that wasn't Ashley, I would fire without mercy. I stood and chose the right-hand passageway. I did not feel scared anymore. In fact, I didn't feel anything at all. Adrenaline was coursing through my system, leaving no room for fear or anything else. The darkness grew progressively thicker, clawing at me. As a lifetime asthma sufferer, it reminded me of times when I needed my inhaler. I knew the flares would soon be useless, regardless of whether they should have been effective. Beside me, I noticed strange scrawling in the dust. The markings were of human origin. At least that was no mystery. I glanced at each one, almost mechanically, knowing that it couldn't be any worse than what we had already seen. It appeared we weren't the first people to stumble into this place. I've seen it, and it blinded me. One of the messages read, "This is its domain, taller than any human." Suddenly I stopped. The last scrawl was different. It was in lowercase and appeared freshly written. It made my blood run cold. It cut me. I'm running for my life. Ashley's writing. And then, as if by magic, I heard two things, a scream and a roar. Ashley, the jackal, they were close. I ran forward, sensing that I had entered a massive cavern. To prove my theory, I impulsively punched the air to my right. If I were still in the claustrophobic cave, my hand would surely have shattered against a wall. But, as I expected, I hit nothing but the stagnant air of the cavern. The flares provided nothing more than a dim, flickering glow. I stared at the light in horror as it slowly faded. The fading light represented my last defense against the darkness of the cave, and its sole inhabitant. The inhabitant some called the jackal. The light faded completely. I was alone. The moment the light disappeared, I heard the voice. It was flat, terrible, and loud. It reverberated around me, seemingly without a source or direction. I spun in the darkness, disoriented by the clawing, constricting shadows that pressed in on me. My heart was in my throat. I knew that if I walked backward, I would no longer find the passageway that had led me to the lair of the jackal. Once you entered this central cavern, there was no leaving it, just like the carvings had said. I promise, I thought. This is my cave, it bellowed. I screamed and ran, but it was a futile gesture. The voice boomed around me, terrifying in its alienness and flat, expressionless quality. The jackal was not human, nor was it a revenant or a ghost of a forgotten culture. It was something that had no place in this universe, something that I wished never to see. My heart thundered in my chest, and my eyes vibrated. I could no longer even control my own body. I'm a prisoner. The other one screamed before I took him, boom. The jackal interrupted my thoughts. I screamed defiantly and hysterically into the darkness around me. It was a petty rebellion. I doubted the jackal even knew what it meant, but I felt better for it, all the same. Around me, the darkness coalesced. It's alive, I thought. I tried to stifle a scream as an image popped into my head. Thousands, millions of bugs crawling all over me, biting, scratching, and running. The thought was banished moments later by the jackal's next terrible oration. "You will remain here forever," it boomed. I knew that voice. My thoughts wandered vaguely, but I couldn't focus enough to make sense of it. After the voice, there came the footsteps. I could both feel the tremors and hear the steps. Hundreds of them, pounding the floor in a rapid and terrifying rhythm. Rolling thunder. I thought crazily and laughed. What little sanity I possessed was rapidly eroding away under the jackal's influence over the cave, and consequently, those within it. I doubted Ashley was still alive. Samantha and Alex had escaped. I didn't even think Karen, Vincent, or Jason had made it out alive. As I considered this, the jackal howled again, the flat voice echoing throughout my dark prison. "They all died, as will you," the jackal roared in its expressionless tone, creating a queer, wavering effect that hurt my ears. My throat burned from the lack of moisture, a headache pounded in my head, and my ears throbbed strangely in time with the footsteps. "I'm just rolling thunder," I thought, and laughed again. Then I considered what the jackal had said. It can read my thoughts. The idea didn't seem as fantastical as it once had. The jackal had only ever spoken after I had a thought. A coincidence? I think not. Pardon the pun, I thought as I considered the mental connection. An idea began to form. I stopped running, emptying my thoughts and banishing the sensory manipulations the jackal had used on me. The footsteps around me intensified, but I heard none of it as I shut down my senses and opened my mind. Exposed without the cloak of my previous panicked thoughts, I felt it, the jackal's mind. It was a colossal alien thing, like a structure too gargantuan for the human mind to comprehend. It would dwarf me, swallow my mind whole, and leave me a gibbering wreck if I considered it for too long. It wasn't even natural, let alone human. Thoughts and ideas seemed to be constructed in a fashion that was incomprehensible to the human mind. In a word, the jackal's presence was dark. I felt its presence wash over me, and I steeled myself. Then I sprung the trap instantly before the beast could retreat. I thought of light, a blinding supernova, more light than any human had ever seen. I had never witnessed such a bright inferno of light. I let the mental image expand in my mind and over onto the jackal's colossal presence. I guessed that such a creature had never seen light, or if it had spent so long underground, bathed in the darkness it controlled. Such light, even in the form of an image, would do tremendous harm to it. Considering the jackal's mental abilities far outclassed my own, I was right. The instant the supernova image touched the jackal's presence, a tremendous shriek filled the chamber, immediately overtaking all the phantom footsteps that had so tormented me. I grinned savagely, despite the pain the high-pitched squeal caused in my ears. At least it sounded vaguely human. It felt empowering to know that I had hurt the jackal, probably badly. I heard rushing noises around me and opened my eyes. Impossibly, the darkness was retracting around me. I spun wildly in the grip of the receding darkness as I moved. Glancing around me, I realized I was in a huge chamber, one that extended far into the distance. I saw columns and pillars and carvings. It suddenly hit me that this was a jackal's feeding ground lair, the very subject of the ominous cave paintings. I had no time to consider it further, for as the final remnants of darkness receded, the cave was lit by lights that had no source. My mental light, I thought. It exposed its only occupant, and that occupant's slave. Just like that, I saw them. Ashley, the jackal. I could never truly describe the beast before me. It wasn't because I didn't know how to articulate it. I knew exactly what to call it. I simply could not comprehend the jackal. It was as though I were viewing it from the extremities of my peripheral vision. It was blurry, soft, and weak. Weak because it had no hard angles or edges. No matter how hard I looked, how much I stared, the jackal remained hidden from me, a formless shape veiled under unreality. The cave paintings and carvings, whatever adjective I might attach to them, were truer than I had ever thought. Even after the jackal turned out to be real, they depicted a blurry, formless jackal, and so it was. Yes, I knew exactly what it was. Indistinct. Ashley, however, was not. I looked at him in horror. His body was covered in blood, flesh, and other less identifiable materials. I could count at least 8 visible wounds, and more red lines that I couldn't distinguish from the gore saturating his form. A gaping wound cut across his stomach, and blood flowed from multiple slashes on his arms and legs. He was probably dead, certainly unconscious, but that wasn't the worst of it. His entire right ear had been torn clean from his head. A bile rose in my throat as I stared at his prostrate form, horrified. The jackal had done this to him. As I thought of the beast before me, I realized that the cavern around me was silent. The jackal's screech, so loud to begin with, had been cut off instantly, moments earlier. Unlike the gradual decline that was characteristic of human sounds, it ended abruptly. Then again, the jackal was nothing like a human. I'd wager every possession I owned that it had no similarity to any creature from this dimension. I couldn't even begin to consider its true form. Even as I watched, it got infinitely worse. Ashley began to move through the air. I hadn't even noticed that he had been airborne. So enthralled had I been by his ravaged body. Slowly, never wavering in speed, Ashley began to recede toward the blurry shape that represented the jackal. I thought back to the carvings in horror. With every sacrifice, the jackal gained form and a greater foothold in this dimension. I wanted to rush forward and tear Ashley from the jackal's grasp, but to come within reach of the creature would mean an unspeakable end, one that I would have already faced at least had I not wounded it with the psychic supernova. Suddenly, Ashley stopped moving, mere meters from the jackal, and I realized with a shock how the jackal had previously communicated through Ashley. Now I understood why I recognized that voice, even distorted as it had been. Ashley's mouth opened, and from it roared the jackal. "You will suffer for using the glow against me." Suffer as he did, the grotesque Ashley-jackal hybrid roared. Evidently, it only knew the light that had hurt it as the glow. It didn't matter. The important thing was that it had been hurt, and badly. I probed my mind. No trace of the jackal's presence remained. Apparently, that part of it, physically manifested in the darkness, had either been destroyed or banished by my mental counterattack. "Even if I meet my death here, beast, I'll do my utmost to bring you with me." I responded bravely. The saturating fear, which had so crippled me both mentally and physically, was gone now. I could see the jackal, regardless of how incomprehensible it was. Much of the terror I had felt at the hands of it was gone, just like the darkness. Even the voice was less intimidating now that it had a definitive source. It spoke again. "I have consumed many. This one is the last. I will be free from my prison," the jackal bellowed, drawing Ashley toward him. "No," I whispered, and then I sprinted toward them. No matter the cost. Even if it were my life or my sanity, I could not allow the jackal to consume Ashley and escape whatever prison it had been incarcerated in. Such a beast would wreak unimaginable destruction on the surface. I pulled a silver piece of equipment, the last thing I'd taken from Ashley's pack, the flare gun. As the jackal and Ashley came together, I drew and fired. The world exploded around me.